Now, we want to talk about how U.S. foreign policy could change under President Trump. Here to discuss that is Jamie Metzl. He's senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He joins us now here live from New York. And so interesting to me that just a few months ago, you were in Taiwan, you met with the president. I'm sure you could not have foreseen this, or could you? I mean, when we look at how perhaps a Trump administration would rearrange everything in the Asia-Pacific, you know, you've written that perhaps there are opportunities there, but that Donald Trump isn't going about it necessarily the right way.
That's exactly right. The relationship, the triangular relationship between the United States, Taiwan, and China is very, very complicated, and it's very delicate. And there have been times when it's even approached war, either between China and Taiwan, or even between a skirmish between China and the United States. And it's been maintained by this very delicate dance. And part of this is maintaining a little bit of a fiction of the status of Taiwan and some language, special language that we've negotiated over decades. And if the United States and if the incoming Trump administration wants to reposition the United States strategically in Asia, by all means, we should do it thoughtfully and strategically. But doing it through late-night tweets that don't seem to be connected to any coherent strategy seems to me a very, very dangerous and short-sighted way to do it.
You know, Jamie, we're looking at pictures now of you at that meeting in Taiwan. As I understand it, Jon Huntsman, the former U.S. ambassador to China, was also in that delegation. I mean, so much to talk about here. How do you think, if he were selected for Secretary of State, and that's still a long shot, the list is long, how would he reshape Trump's foreign policy?
So the bad news is that so far President-elect Trump has really, in my view, mishandled U.S.-China relations. The good news is that now that Jon Huntsman is on the list of potential picks for Secretary of State, we have someone who is probably one of the top China and Taiwan experts in the United States. And bringing somebody like that into the team, I think, would go a long way towards making everybody in the region feel a lot calmer about the future.
You know, a lot of what we've seen, a lot of the sentiment running around President-elect Trump is the fact that they don't want to do anything business as usual. The administration doesn't, and they believe that is echoing a sentiment that comes from voters. As far as you can see, would it be best, I mean, how can you tell them to first calculate the consequences of changing those policies? Because it seems right now that we've got some actions, some very controversial actions, but not a lot of thought through in terms of what it would all lead to. What is the end game here?
Yeah, that's exactly right. The election has clearly shown that many people in the United States are uncomfortable with business as usual. But that doesn't mean that we should just take a hammer to business as usual, because the world exists in a delicate and in many ways dangerous balance. And so if we're going to change, if the United States is going to change its policy, there are consequences. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't change. It just means we need to think strategically. And the case in point here with Taiwan, there are a lot of things that China could do in response to this somewhat provocative act by President-elect Trump. And if China takes some of those actions, for example, by pressuring some of the 22 countries who are currently recognizing Taiwan to unrecognize Taiwan, or even more aggressive actions, as were mentioned in your report, the United States will be in a very difficult position of deciding how important is Taiwan to the United States relative to North Korea, relative to Boeing's ability to sell airplanes in China, and to all these other things. And at the end of the day, China probably cares more about Taiwan than the United States does. So it feels good. It feels like if you just attacking somebody or making these kinds of statements through Twitter, it feels good on some emotional level. But if the United States is being positioned for failure down the line, that's not being tough, that's being stupid.
Yeah, it's such a good point, Jamie, especially when you've got national security advisors saying that the main threat to the United States is North Korea. One of the only levers of power you have in North Korea is China. Very delicate balancing act that we hope the Trump foreign team looks at. Jamie, thanks so much for coming in. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Now, caught in
with China, or at least concern from China. Joining me now is CNN political commentator and Trump supporter Jeffrey Lord, CNN political analyst and USA Today columnist Kirsten Powers, and Democratic strategist Jonathan Ticini. Kirsten, what do you make of this phone call?
Well, I think the biggest question is whether it was an accident or whether it was something that he did intentionally. Now, he has tweeted out that he received a phone call, and it was a phone call to congratulate him, and he took the phone call. But you know, it was on his schedule today that he was going to meet with John Bolton, who's the former ambassador to the UN under George Bush, who wrote in the Wall Street Journal this year, basically talked about the ladders of escalation, diplomatic ladders of escalation with Taiwan, and the ways that you could deal with China through basically antagonizing them, through inviting, for example, people from Taiwan to come to visit the State Department, and starting to sort of escalate in this way. So it's kind of interesting that he may have met with him today, and there are people that he is looking at for positions in administration who advocate this kind of behavior. So it's possible that it was that. It's also possible that he just received the phone call and he didn't know he wasn't supposed to take it, though I find that highly unlikely.
Jeff, I mean, is it a concern to you? I mean, there have been questions raised about how much Donald Trump is receiving intelligence briefings, and probably more to the point on in this issue, communicating with the State Department, actually getting readouts from the State Department, or consulting with them before a call like this.
No, it's not a concern. I'm sure he's consulting with somebody there in his intelligence, group there that's surrounding him, General Flynn, et cetera. But Anderson, I would point out that 4 presidents of the United States that I can think of right off the bat, Franklin Roosevelt, Nixon, Reagan, and Obama, have taken office and then changed major American foreign policy with different countries. Franklin Roosevelt recognized the Soviet Union the first time in its existence after 16 years of policy by 4 presidents, including 1 Democrat and 3 Republicans. Richard Nixon famously opened the door to China, stunned the world with Jeff, so reversed decades.
But Jeff, nobody did it as president-elect. This is ridiculous. Ronald Reagan
did the same in his very first press conference with in terms of the Soviet Union.
But
and
Jeffrey,
of course, President Obama has just reversed policy.
Don't you think he discussed it with somebody first, and maybe like met and heard? You know, we're talking about 40 years of diplomacy, bipartisan, with Republican and Democrats. And normally, what you would do is maybe have some meetings and talk to people and think this through, not just do a phone call. Are you suggesting?
How do you know he hasn't?
Well, Jeff, the latest reporting. I mean, officials from the State Department said that they've not been in touch with anyone from the transition regarding President-elect Trump for any of his phone calls. For any of his phone calls.
I understand that, but my point is...
But does that... why doesn't... I guess my question is, why doesn't that concern you?
What? I'm sorry?
Why doesn't that concern you? I mean, presidents, there is a State Department for a reason. You can argue whether or not, they have a perfect track record.
That's a good point. That's a good point. And let me point out to you that when Richard Nixon did his opening with China, he didn't talk to the State Department. I believe he even kept his own Secretary of State out of it. He dealt with Henry Kissinger, who was his General Flynn of the day, his own private national security advisor.
Jeff, but here's the problem. First of all, we're normalizing Donald Trump again. And if you look back at the debates and throughout the campaign, it was very clear Donald Trump had no idea about diplomacy. He had no idea how to talk about the world.
By the way, the reporting is that Mike Pence has been consulting with the State Department for some of his...
Well, that's fine. He's the vice president-elect. You would think, this is the problem, I think, long-term, is Donald Trump doesn't know diplomacy. He doesn't understand the world. And this kind of phone call is sort of mind-boggling, because anybody that had a smidgen of... the two of us, if we were president-elect, we would know that there is a long-term one-China policy. We would not accept this kind of call.
But so what?
Hold on, Jeff. And we would at least call up the State Department, the expert, and say, how do we handle this? Number 2, in case you didn't know, Donald Trump is the president-elect currently. He does not have the authority to be talking to and essentially making these kind of steps that put the United States and the current president in the kind of danger.
Jonathan, I want you to be able
the other guy.
Jeff, I want you to be able to respond to that.
It's ridiculous.
Look, when Barack Obama was just the presidential nominee of the Democratic Party, he went over to Berlin and gave a major foreign policy speech. I mean, something no other presidential nominee had ever done. Well, and he wasn't even president-elect. I mean, come on, John.
But wait a minute, Jeff. He didn't meet with the head of state. He didn't meet with the head of state. Then he went and gave a speech. And by the way,
John,
in case you didn't,
is the problem.
No, but
you are
Jeff,
advocating
it's not the same
status
at all.
quo.
Don't talk
You are
over each other.
advocating the status quo, and Donald Trump has been elected to do things differently. Now, I don't know, and you don't know, none of us know what's really going on behind the scenes with this phone call. But whether it was, however you want to describe it, this is something that we're going to see a lot of in the future, where the current ways of doing things, doing things in Washington, which the American people have said does not work, are being changed.
So Kirsten, what about that point? Because I'm sure there's many people who would agree with that, saying, well, you know what, this is what he was elected to do.
I think that's a great point.
He's winging it, and
well,
maybe that's fine.
I don't think he should be winging it. I think it is right that people want to do things differently, and I don't think people are necessarily opposed to a different attack with China, perhaps. What the issue here is, like I said, what we really need is more information. We need to know what went into the thinking behind this, and it does seem that he just responded to an incoming phone call, which doesn't seem like a strategy. And there's a reason, Jeffrey, you were saying, so what? I mean, so what? Well, there's a reason the United States sided with China, right? I mean, it's one of the biggest markets in the entire world.
Maybe
we
those
do business with them.
changed.
And with no, but listen, with China and Taiwan, it's an either or. You either are doing business with China or you're doing business with Taiwan. China is not going to say, you just go do things with Taiwan and continue to have a relationship with us. That's just not the way it's going to work. And they very likely will retaliate.
Diplomacy does have some arcane rules. I agree that some of those are uncomfortable, Jeff, but any normal diplomat, any person running for elective office in the United States Senate understands these rules, and you can't just come in like a bull in a china shop and upset these things. It does take time. It does take some thought and process and talking to people. And this is the problem. The last point I'll make is, this is the problem we have to face with Donald Trump. He's unprepared. He does not understand the world. And we have a man walking to the Oval Office that will tweet, will pick up phone calls, and not go through those kind of processes that can result in a shift, but should do so in a very thoughtful way.
Yeah. Jeffrey, I want you
John, we've done it your way, and the government is in a mess. That's all I can say. The very first thing that Ronald Reagan did, and actually there was some accident to it, for decades, the Soviet ambassador had been the only one of 150 ambassadors to get a private entrance into the State Department to go directly in an private elevator to the Secretary of State's office. When Ronald Reagan became president, he drove into that private garage and was turned away and made to go through the public entrance. The message sent, things are changing. Whether this is intentional or not, things are changing. Message delivered.
Like I said, I think it's right to, as the president, to set the policy for the United States. It's just that the United States isn't his toy. This is bipartisan policy through to Republican and Democrats, and I think that he needs to maybe spend some time and understand that.
All right, let's leave the conversation there. Jonathan, thanks so much. Kirsten as well. Jeffrey Lord, have a great weekend. This week, the Ohio State campus was shaken by violence. The FBI said the 18-year-old would-be terrorist may have been radicalized by either Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Up next, another story from an American college. This is incredible. Young, in love, and radicalized. How a University of Mississippi cheerleader and her boyfriend committed themselves to ISIS and ended up in a U.S. federal prison.